Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth, and I am really excited to share with you today two of my absolute favorite folk tales. And I absolutely love doing preschool story time at the library, but some of the stories that I love to tell are a little bit longer and are intended for older audiences, so I don't get to tell them as often as I do some of my favorite stories that are for the younger preschoolers. So I'm really excited today to share two of these folk tales that are for an older audience, and I hope that you enjoy. We're going to start today with a folk tale from Russia, and this one is called Matreshka. Once upon a time in Russia, a girl lived with her grandfather in a little cottage not too far from the woods. And one day her grandfather said, Kata, you are old enough now to go to the market all by yourself and pick up what we need. Well, Kata was a little afraid, but she was strong and tough, and so she wrapped her shawl around her and she set off through the dark forest. In a while, she got to the marketplace and she bought a loaf of bread and a hunk of cheese and some apples to take home with her. And as she was shopping, it got colder and colder, and she wrapped her shawl tighter and tighter around her. And when she was done, she looked up at the sky and she saw that it was getting dark and gray. And she said, oh no, I have to get home before it starts to snow or I'll freeze out there in the woods. And she turned around to head home and she ran smack into an old woman. Oh, I'm so sorry, said the old woman. I wasn't looking where I was going. I'm just so hungry. I haven't eaten in days. Well, Kata gave the woman an apple. She tore off some of her bread and gave her a bit of cheese, and the old woman ate every last bite. And when she was done, she said, thank you, kind girl, and for your generosity, I have a gift for you. And she reached in to her cloak and she pulled out a beautiful doll and she gave it to Kata. And she said, you must always keep this doll very close to you. Oh my goodness, thank you, said Kata, and she tucked the doll into her own cloak and started home as fast as she could. When she got into the woods, it was already starting to snow, and Kata started to run. But soon it was a blizzard, and she couldn't even see her hand in front of her face. Oh dear, what will I do? She wondered. I'll freeze out here if I don't find somewhere to stay, and my grandfather must be so worried already. She walked, and it got colder and colder until in the distance she saw a light. She ran towards it, hoping it was a house, and when she got there, it was a house. But not an ordinary house. It was a house stuck on top of a chicken leg. Ooh. Well, Kata was very scared of what might be inside, but she knew she didn't have a choice. If she stayed out in the blizzard, she would surely die. So she climbed up the chicken leg and she knocked on the door. Soon, an old woman answered, but she was not an ordinary old woman. She was 7 feet tall with wild hair and nails like claws, and she said, come in, my little pretty one. My name is Baba Yaga. Kata was more scared than ever, but she knew she could not stay outside in the blizzard, so she said, oh, please, I just need a warm place to rest for the night and perhaps a spot of tea, and then I'll be on my way as soon as the blizzard stops. But Baba Yaga laughed, and she said, we'll see about that. And she grabbed Kata by the arm and dragged her inside. But when Baba Yaga got Kata inside, she sat her next to a warm fire. She gave her some hot tea and biscuits, and she said, now stay here and I'll prepare your room. So Kata sat by the fire, eating a biscuit, and all of a sudden she heard a tiny voice say, Matreshka, Matreshka, I'm as cold can be. Please may I have a spot of tea? Well, Kata looked around, and she heard it again. Matreshka, Matreshka, I'm as cold can be. Please may I have a spot of tea? Well, it was coming from her pocket. Kata reached inside, and she pulled out the little Matreshka doll. Oh, Well, sure, she said, and she gave Matryoshka a little bit of tea and a tiny bit of biscuit, and she tucked her back into her pocket. Just then, Baba Yaga came back and said, "Your room is ready. Now follow me." Kata tiptoed after her, but when Baba Yaga opened the door to her room, she was surprised. There was a roaring fire and a big warm bed with a fluffy pillow. It looked very comfortable. "Good night, little ones. See you in the morning," said Baba Yaga, and she shut the door. Kata was so tired that she got into bed and she went straight to sleep. In the morning, she woke up and the sun was shining. The blizzard was over. Kata jumped out of bed and ran to the door of the bedroom, but of course, it was locked. "Baba Yaga," she called, "I have to get out. I have to get home to my grandfather." Well, Baba Yaga's face appeared in the little window in the doorway. "I don't think so, little one," she said. "I'm going in the forest to get the magical mushrooms that I need for my stew, and when I return, I will cook you into the stew and eat you up." And she cackled all the way down the hall. Oh no, Kata tugged and pulled at the door, but it was locked tight. All of a sudden, she heard a voice from her pocket. "Matryoshka, Matryoshka, I may be small, but I'm just as useful as one who is tall." Kata pulled Matryoshka out of her pocket, and the little doll said, "Tie your shawl around me and lower me down through the window in the door, and I will reach the lock." So Kata did just that and lowered Matryoshka down, and sure enough, click, the door opened. "Oh, thank you, Matryoshka," said Kata, and she tucked the doll back in her shawl and dashed down the hallway. But there were so many doors. She didn't know which one was the front door that would let her out of the house and climb down the chicken leg and run away. "Oh dear," she said, "we're running out of time. How will I ever get out of here?" All of a sudden, she heard the little voice again. "Matryoshka, Matryoshka, I may be small, but I'm not the smallest one of all. Open me up, and I will roll under all the doors and see which one leads to safety." So Kata opened the Matryoshka up, and sure enough, there was an even smaller Matryoshka inside. And that Matryoshka rolled under each of the doors until she found the right one. And she said, "This is it! This is the one!" So Kata ran to the door and opened it up, and sure enough, it was the door to the kitchen. So Kata scooped up Matryoshka, put her in the pocket, ran through the kitchen, climbed down the chicken leg. She didn't see Baba Yaga anywhere, and she started to run as fast as she could across the yard. She got to the gate and, oh no, it was locked. "Oh, Matryoshka, if only you were small enough to fit through the keyhole, you could unlock the gate and we could be free." "What will we do?" said Kata. But then she heard, "Matryoshka, Matryoshka, I may be small, but I'm not the smallest one of all." And sure enough, Kata opened up Matryoshka, and there was a smaller Matryoshka inside. And that Matryoshka hopped into the keyhole and click, the gate opened. Well, Kata grabbed Matryoshka and ran, but she only made it a few steps before she heard Baba Yaga's laugh. And all of a sudden, a rope landed around Kata, and she couldn't go another step. It was Baba Yaga's magic rope. She turned, and Baba Yaga said, Now, we can't have you running off. I just have to collect a few more mushrooms, and then I will have enough for my stew. So you stay right there, and I'll be back." And she set off back into the woods. Kata had no idea what to do. She couldn't move. She looked down at her feet, and she saw a tiny mouse hole. "Oh, Matryoshka, if only you were small enough to fit through that hole and touch the rope on the other side, I would be free." And then she heard, "Matryoshka, Matryoshka, I may be small, but I'm not the smallest one of all." And Kata opened her up, and sure enough, there was an even smaller Matryoshka inside. And that Matryoshka slid down the mouse hole and popped back up on the other side, and she barely touched the rope, and the spell was broken. Kata picked up Matryoshka and started to run, and only made it a few steps before she heard Baba Yaga's laugh. And whoosh! The rope fell around her again, and she couldn't move. Now I've got you, said Baba Yaga. I've got all my mushrooms, and it's time to make you ready for my stew. Kata did not know what to do. She was trapped, and from her pocket she heard, Matryoshka, Matryoshka, I may be small, but you need the smallest one of all. And the tiniest Matryoshka popped out of Kata's pocket and climbed under the rope, up Baba Yaga's leg and into her hair. And Baba Yaga said, "Oh, what is that? Oh, her head was so itchy." But she turned back to Kata and she said, "Chinkita, Pinkita, magic juice, turn Taka into a goose." Wait a minute, her name is not Taka. She was very confused by the little Matryoshka in her hair. And then Matryoshka climbed onto Baba Yaga's nose. Oh, what's that? Oh, Baba Yaga started hitting herself in the face. And she turned to Kata. She said, "Hennery, pennery, whirl and twirl, turn Kata into a girl." Wait, she already is a girl. And then Matryoshka climbed right into Baba Yaga's ear. And Baba Yaga said, "Ah, what is that? What is that in my ear?" She was so confused, she turned to Kata and said, "Bippity boppity grin and grog, turn Baba Yaga into a frog." Uh-oh. And right before Kata's eyes, Baba Yaga shrank down into a tiny brown frog and hopped off into the woods. And the spell was broken. Kata scooped up the littlest Matryoshka and ran all the way home, where her grandfather was waiting for her. He was so happy to see her. And you know how they lived. Happily ever after. The end. That is one of my favorites, and it's so fun to do all of the dolls, the tiny little Matryoshkas. And the Russian nesting doll, which is what Matryoshka is actually appears in many Russian folktales and is a classic in Russian literature. So it's always fun to be able to use one of those to tell a story. Our second folktale today comes from Scotland, and this one is called Molly Whuppie. Once upon a time, there was a girl, a very clever girl named Molly Whuppie, and she lived with her two sisters and her mother and father. And they didn't have very much money, and when the girls got old enough, her father said to them, "Girls, it is time for you to go out into the world and make your own fortunes and live on your own. We love you very much, and good luck." So Molly Whuppie and her sisters set out from their house that they'd grown up in, and they walked and walked and walked and walked. Oh, they were very tired. And finally, in the distance, they saw a big cottage in the woods. And Molly Whuppie said, I bet that whoever lives there would just give us a bit of milk and some bread, and then we could have the energy to keep walking. So they went and they knocked on the door to the cottage, and a woman answered. She said, "Oh, girls, what are you doing here?" And Molly Whuppie said, "Please, do you mind if we just have some milk and a bit of bread, and then we'll be on our way?" The woman said, I just don't know. You see, I am the wife of a giant, and if he comes home and he sees you here, he will want to eat you right up. It will not be good for you." But Molly Whuppie said, "Well, what if we're just really quick? There's not another house around for miles." So the giant's wife took a deep breath and said, "Okay, well, come quickly. Here, you can have some milk and sit by the fire for just a moment, but then you'll have to be on your way." Well, the girls were just sipping cups of cold milk and taking a bite of bread when they heard boom, boom, boom. The house started to shake. The ground was rumbling, and in through the door burst a huge, ugly giant. And he said, "Oh, what's all this? We have some visitors." The giant's wife said, "Now, husband, these girls are just having a quick drink and a bit of bread, and then they're going to be on their way, so you just leave them alone." And he said, "Oh, I don't think so. But first, it's time for my dinner." And the giant sat down at the table, and his wife fed him a whole turkey and potatoes, buckets of gravy, and he ate the whole thing up. Ooh. And then he took Molly Whuppie and her two sisters, and he put them in a bed with his own daughters. And he tied ropes of straw around Molly Whuppie and her sisters' necks, and he tied ropes of gold around his own daughters' necks. And he said, "I'll be back." And then he went upstairs, boom, 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 and he crashed into bed, and he fell asleep. Well, Molly Whuppie waited and waited until everyone in the house was asleep. And then, very carefully, she switched the ropes of straw and the ropes of gold. She put the ropes of gold around her neck and her two sisters' necks, and she put the ropes of straw around the giant's daughters' own necks. And when he came downstairs in the middle of the night, boom, 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 he took his own daughters and he locked them up in the cellar. And then he went back upstairs, and Molly Whuppie shook her sisters awake. She said, come on, we have to run." And they ran and ran as fast as they could out of that house. Well, they ran so far and so fast that they got to a castle. And they went inside, and Molly Whuppie told the story of how they had escaped the giant. Well, the king was delighted. He loved stories. He said, "Oh, that's a wonderful story, Molly Whuppie. Now, if you go back to the giant's house and you get the sword that he keeps above his bed, I will marry your oldest daughter to my oldest son. She'll be a princess. You'll have a princess in the family." Molly Whuppie thought for a moment. She said, "You know what? I'll do it." So she left. She wrapped her shawl around her. She ran back to the giant's house, and she waited outside. She didn't think that he was there. She saw his wife working in the yard, and she thought that the giant must be off at his work too. So she snuck inside, and she ran up to the giant's room, and she hid in the closet. And a little while later, sure enough, she heard boom, boom, boom. And the giant burst through the door, and he said, "Oh, what's for dinner? I'm hungry." And his wife put down in front of him hundreds of pancakes dripping with maple syrup. Oh, she gave him bacon and eggs. He ate everything so fast. And then, he rubbed his belly, and he marched upstairs and crashed into bed. Molly Whuppie waited until she could hear his snores. Shh. Then slowly, she crept out of the closet. She knew she would have to get the sword out of its sheath because it would be too heavy to carry everything. So she crept up. She had to reach above the giant's head because the sword was above his bed. He was snoring. She started to inch it out as slowly and quietly as she could, and boom, the giant woke up. And he started to run, and Molly Whuppie ran, and the giant ran. And Molly Whuppie ran, and the giant ran. And Molly Whuppie ran all the way up to the bridge of one hair. And she ran across. And the giant couldn't follow her. He said, "Woe betide you, Molly Whuppie, if you ever come to see me again." Molly Whuppie said, "You never know. You might see me again." And she took the sword all the way back to the castle, and she presented it to the king. Well, the king was delighted. They had a beautiful wedding. He married his eldest son to Molly Whuppie's eldest sister, and she became a princess. And at the beautiful feast, he said, "You know, Molly Whuppie, you are a very clever girl." And she said, "I know." And he said, "You know, if you go back to the giant's house and you get me the purse of gold that he keeps under his pillow, I'll marry your second sister to my second son. She could be a princess too." Molly Whuppie thought, and she said, "You know, she has always wanted to be a princess. I'll do it." So Molly Whuppie wrapped her shawl around her, and she ran all the way back to the giant's house. Again, she waited to see if the giant was out. His wife was working in the yard and there was no sign of the giant. So she snuck into the house. She ran up the stairs, and this time in the giant's bedroom, she hid in the chimney nook. And not long after that, she heard boom, boom, boom. The giant crashed through the door and he said, "I'm hungry." And he sat down at the table. His wife fed him 30 hamburgers. She fed him buckets of French fries, and he ate it all up. And then he climbed up the stairs, boom, 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 and fell into bed. And soon Molly Whuppie heard the giant snoring. Shh. Well, she crept out of the chimney nook. She had to reach under his pillow this time to get the purse of gold. She crawled along the floor. She reached her hand. She felt it. She started slowly to tug it out from underneath the pillow, and boom, the giant woke up. Oh, Molly Whuppie grabbed the gold and she ran, and the giant ran. And Molly Whuppie ran, and the giant ran. And Molly Whuppie ran all the way to the bridge of one hair, and she scampered across. And the giant couldn't follow. He called, "Whoa, betide you, Molly Whuppie, if you ever come to see me again." And she said, "You never know. I might come to see you again." And she ran all the way back to the castle, and she presented the king with the purse of gold. And sure enough, he married his second son to Molly Whuppie's second sister. They had a beautiful wedding. She became a princess. And at the wedding feast, the king said to Molly, "You know, Molly Whuppie, you're a very smart girl." And Molly Whuppie said, "I know." And the king said, "If you go get the ring of invisibility that the giant wears on his thumb, I will marry you to my handsomest, richest, kindest son." And Molly looked over at the prince and she said, "He is pretty cute. You know what? I'll do it." So she wrapped her shawl around herself and she ran all the way back to the giant's house. And she waited. She watched. The giant wasn't home. She ran up to his bedroom, and this time she knew she had to hide under the bed. So she slid underneath, and she waited for the giant to come home. And sure enough, soon, boom, 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 the giant crashed through the front door, and he said, "I'm in the mood for Italian food." And his wife set in front of him barrels of spaghetti, garlic bread, gallons of wine. Oh, the giant ate it all. And then he stomped up the stairs, boom, 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 and he crashed into bed. Well, Molly Whuppie waited for the giant to start snoring. Shh, and his hand was dangling off the edge of the bed, and every time he breathed, it would go up and down and up and down, and she could see the ring of invisibility on his thumb when it was bobbing up and down in front of her face. Well, she would have to get the ring over the knuckle to get it off. She reached out. She started to ease it off very slowly. The giant gave a snort. She stopped. She waited. She eased it off a little more, and boom, the giant woke up, and he reached under the bed, and he grabbed Molly Whuppie, and he said, "I've got you now, Molly Whuppie. Now, what should I do with you?" Well, Molly Whuppie was pretty smart, and she said, "Well, would you like to know what I would do with me?" The giant said, "What?" She said, "I would put me in a sack with a cat, a dog, a pair of scissors, and a needle and thread, and I would go find the biggest tree branch I could, and I would beat me to a pulp." "That's a good idea," said the giant. So he got a big sack, and he put Molly in it with a dog, a cat, some scissors, and a needle and thread, and he tied her in the sack to a tree, and he marched off to find the biggest stick he could. Well, Molly sat in the sack, and she waited, and the giant's wife was working in the garden nearby, and Molly started to chant, "If you could see what I could see." "Well, Molly, what can you see in there?" called the giant's wife. "If you could see what I could see," said Molly Whuppie. "Molly Whuppie, what is it that you see in there?" said the giant's wife. If you could see what I could see, said Molly Whuppie. Well, I want to see what you can see. What is it? Said the giant's wife. So Molly Whuppie cut herself out of the sack and helped the giant's wife in, and then she tied the sack back up with the needle and the thread. Well, Molly, I can't see anything in here. What's going on? Said the giant's wife. And Molly ran around the side of the house to hide. And not too long after, the giant came marching back. Boom, boom, boom. He didn't just have a stick. He had a whole oak tree. And he was just getting ready to beat that sack to a pulp while the giant's wife was screaming, "No, it's your own dear wife, don't do it!" But he couldn't hear her over the cat meowing and the dog barking. He raised up the branch. Well, Molly Whuppie felt bad. The giant's wife had been kind. She did not want the giant to beat his own wife into a pulp. So she popped out from outside the house and she said, "Nah, nah, 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 nah." Oh, the giant turned purple. He was enraged. He said, "Oh, Molly Whuppie." And Molly Whuppie ran as fast as she could. And the giant ran. And Molly Whuppie ran. And the giant ran. And Molly Whuppie ran all the way to the bridge of one hair. And straight across it. And the giant said, "Woe betide you, Molly Whuppie, if you ever come here to see me again." And Molly Whuppie said, "You'll never see me again." And she went back to the castle. She presented the ring of invisibility to the king, and he married Molly off to his youngest, handsomest, richest, kindest son. She became a princess, and you know how they lived. Happily ever after. The end. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to listen today. I hope you enjoyed the folk tales as much as I enjoy telling them. And we have lots of other great programs on AATL TV if you're looking for things to do or watch or whatnot, programs for all ages. So take a look at what else we have to offer if you haven't yet. Thanks again for listening.